On the 25th of May 2027, Star Wars will be celebrating its 50th anniversary. We will have just seen the re-release of the original movie in cinemas and will be gearing up for Lucasfilm's next big swing at the box office only a few days later. Whether the Starfighter movie is a success or not is by the by, as it will be entirely unlikely, whatever its quality or cultural footprint, to dramatically move the franchise's proverbial needle in any significant way, at least not a positive one. The film's quality is currently unknown, but is ultimately mostly irrelevant. Its director, Sean Levy, may be capable of making money at the box office, but as we've seen with his last big budget franchise movie, Marvel's Deadpool and Wolverine, money isn't everything. In itself, $1 billion at the box office is impressive. Obviously, there's no getting away from that. But it doesn't signal a change in fortune or suggest a switch up of filmmaking methodology is about to occur, especially when it only comes once and in a way that is completely unrelated to the other films with which it's supposed to be sharing a universe. The third Deadpool movie may have been a cash cow, but it's not one that people are talking about 2 years after the fact. After the initial buzz and cultural heatwave it created at the time of its release, it was quickly forgotten about by fans of the MCU, and they moved on, setting their minds back to the problem that was and still is the ultimate degradation of what was once a truly dominant cinematic franchise. That movie made more than enough to justify its existence, and it tricked enough people into thinking it was anything like its two far superior predecessors for them to all flock to the cinemas again and again. But in the cold light of day, it shares a lot more commonalities with the Star Wars sequel trilogy and the derivative Jurassic World movies than either of the two previous Deadpool films. There are enough superficial hints towards the things you liked about the two titular characters in their previous movies, and they do enough familiar Deadpool and Wolverine-y things to skate by without having to tell an actually coherent, meaningful, lore-accurate, in-character story that fits within the trilogy it's supposed to be capping off. And to delve into this example with slightly more depth, unlike in his first two movies, Deadpool's an actual piece of shit. And not in a cheeky, lovable way that he normally is. He rips Wolverine's corpse to pieces, all while the movie claims that it's being respectful of Logan's ending. He outright murders an entirely pleasant and innocent, if a bit overbearing, variant of himself, just because he doesn't like him. He dobs on Johnny Storm to an evil, murderous supervillain for bad-mouthing her, before she promptly kills him horrifically. He then lies about it to Johnny's friends and pretends that he doesn't know anything about it. The movie even starts by resetting his arc from the previous film, where he's left having found a renewed sense of purpose in life, creating for himself a full family of other misfits and lost souls, saving his girlfriend and preventing a misguided young boy from losing himself down the path of evil. In Deadpool and Wolverine, he's completely set back, suddenly feeling burdened by a lack of self-worth, feeling immensely purposeless due to his rejection from the Avengers. The movie shoehorns a spiteful, phony plot into place, for no other reason than the writers just couldn't be bothered to try and weave Wolverine carefully into the story that the two previous Deadpool films had already laid out. We got a pointless, hollow husk of two characters that have previously been so full of drama, tragedy, and story. And considering the cheap inclusion of easy cameos such as Blade, Elektra, Gambit, Sabretooth, the Human Torch, Happy Hogan, Henry Cavill, and even the incredible fucking Hulk, you can't help but think that the whole concept of this movie and the idea of these two titular characters combining on the big screen was done with the same bad faith, shallow mindset. The point I'm trying to make here, believe it or not, is that Star Wars is following this same lazy framework that Marvel have been using, and for them, it's actually beginning to yield even worse results. Character, story, themes, arcs are all taking a backseat to this cheap, easy-to-replicate formula that ultimately led to the creation of shallow movies full of superficial member berries and callbacks to better films. This kind of empty key jangling is not a viable substitute for good storytelling. It doesn't matter how many familiar faces you throw at the screen. If you destroy the characters that people love by making them act wildly out of character again and again, even in aid of a cheap gag or an emotional payoff, they'll come to hate you for it later. The gag might even work and make the audience laugh hysterically at the time, in the dark, atmospheric comfort of the cinema. The payoff might make them weep uncontrollably with sadness, and they may even come out of the theatre with a sense of immense satisfaction. But if, the more they think about the story, more and more pieces of it come apart, and the characters who once inspired generations are butchered and replaced unceremoniously by mutilated skinwalking shells that look vaguely like them but are full of none of the same stuff that made them what they were, people will either move on quickly and forget about the entire movie, or they'll turn on it and resent it for destroying everything they've loved about the franchise in the first place. Does any of this sound familiar to you, Star Wars? My overriding point here is that Star Wars is in a very bad place at the moment. The Megatron and Goofy movie is just another in a long line of spiteful, sloppy, distasteful, disrespectful releases from a studio that seems to hate the very audience that made Star Wars, Marvel, and every other one of its once successful franchises exactly what they were. And this isn't even really about money. Success can come in a few different shapes and sizes. One of Disney's very few genuine masterpieces since their purchase of Lucasfilm nearly 15 years ago was Andor, a show that didn't get anywhere near the viewership or cultural traction it deserved or the higher-ups would have liked. Yet for those who watched it, including myself, it stands above anything else in the Star Wars universe in terms of sheer writing quality and consistency since the original trilogy. It didn't need to rely on the iconically haunting breaths of Darth Vader to terrify its audience. Its writing did that. It didn't need to show a flashback of Anakin fighting battle droids in order to make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. Its writing did that. It didn't even need a lightsaber or force lightning to create drama, action, or spectacle. Its writing did that. On the flip side, while nobody or their dog seemed to actually watch Andor, pretty much everyone with even the most casual of interests in the franchise, and even many more without it, saw the sequel trilogy. While there are many who still try going to bat for the sequels, it's pretty much inarguable at this point that their reputation has not really passed the test of time. You might even argue that they were pretty much soured on after no more than a couple of weeks beyond the release of Episode 9. Beyond all the minutiae of the writing, fight choreography, dialogue, and acting, all of which are riddled with flaws, audience were able to recognise quite quickly that what they had always loved about Star Wars and the characters within it was not exactly being replicated in this reimagined, supposedly respectful reboot. Han Solo is made out to be a dull-minded, neurologically slow half-wit who is no longer married to Leia, no longer serving as a general for the Republic, no longer in possession of the Millennium Falcon, and no longer any good at the one thing that he is known for being very good at in the original trilogy. We're told he's a swindler, a liar, a cheat, a coward, who seemingly runs from all his problems, up to and including the raising and potential rescue and rehabilitation of his only son. Leia Organa was reduced to a lifeless version of her older self, having nothing of interest to say to anyone at any time, and being forced into a mentor role in which she was without purpose because her one and only student was already at near maximum power level by the time she even began her training. Luke Skywalker's legacy was brutally ravaged, and his earnest, hopeful, optimistic character was stripped of all that made him the galaxy's greatest hero. He disrespects the Jedi, demeans himself obnoxiously, laments his life, and comes within seconds of slaughtering his own then completely innocent nephew. We don't get a single scene in which the OT's three main protagonists share the screen. Luke and Han don't interact at all. Each of them die alone and for no reason, all except to bait a cheap emotional reaction from the audience and the other characters. Besides their names and the odd bit of paraphernalia, there is almost nothing to hang on to for any one of these three big hitters that suggests that they're the same characters we once knew and loved. The problem even extends to side characters like R2-D2, C-3PO, Lando Calrissian, Emperor Palpatine, and even Darth Vader. Why does R2 play basically no role in helping the main characters throughout the trilogy, when he has always had so much agency and courage in the past? Why does 3PO randomly have a red arm, only for it to be arbitrarily replaced with no explanation? Why is Lando not present for any of the first two movies, when presumably he would have been considered a valuable ally that could have been called upon far earlier? How the fuck did Palpatine return? And if Darth Vader's voice in Kylo's head was really just Palpatine all along, why on earth did the redeemed ghost of Anakin Skywalker never once appear to his grandson to explain, sorry kid, the helmet you're speaking to, that's not me. I'm actually just a good guy now, and you should be too. All the legacy characters used in Disney's flagship trilogy were either utterly butchered or used purely as an asset to sell toys, or just generally gain credit from the most casual of audience members who just want to see the names and faces they recognize on the big screen, no matter how arbitrarily or disrespectfully they're implemented. This way of treating legacy characters and concepts is a constant throughout all of Disney's many Star Wars projects. Obi-Wan is sidelined in his own TV show, and forced into absurd law-breaking scenarios wherein he comes face-to-face with Vader multiple times before finally confronting him in A New Hope, greatly diminishing the grandeur of that iconic scene in which Obi-Wan is killed by his former apprentice. He goes on a life-threatening adventure with a young Princess Leia who, as per her own iconic hologram message in A New Hope, is not supposed to actually personally know Obi-Wan Kenobi at all. Don't you think if she had had this whole swashbuckling experience with the man, she might reminisce or make reference to it in her message, even vaguely? The show has no respect for the law and no respect for Obi-Wan. Then we have the Acolyte, which retcons Anakin's specialness by creating not just one, but two incredibly powerful Force users that are also immaculately conceived by the Force, just as the Chosen One was supposed to be. Not to mention the strong implication that Yoda has been involved in a huge, despicable cover-up of the fact that Sith were in fact present not too long before the prequels occurred. There is also the additional cover-up of the catastrophe that, in the show's own opinion, paints the Jedi as incredibly questionable, morally askew killers out to serve only their own interests. Then we have Ahsoka, and the world between worlds, which grants our beloved Plank-like protagonist another chance at life as she gets herself recklessly killed by being nowhere near as good a Jedi as she should be. Sabine survives a stab wound in the gut so similar to the one that killed Qui-Gon Jinn that you have to wonder what the hell Liam Neeson did for his character to deserve such an unceremonious death, considering how easily Sabine seems to just shake it off. Even in The Mandalorian, Grogu arbitrarily introduces force healing, obviously for the meta reason of allowing the Rise of Skywalker to use it sometime later in the year, but also simply because the writers just thought it was a neat idea, regardless of the fact that no Jedi or Sith in the history of the Star Wars canon has thus far ever used such an ability, particularly not with such ease, regardless of how powerful they were.
That's not how the Force works.
And that brings me on to the Force. Throughout Disney Star Wars, we've been shown things like Force Skype, Force freezing, Force teleporting, Force healing, Force flying, Force projecting, Force ghost weather manipulating, Force ghost catching, Force lightsaber color changing, and Force two characters to kiss-ing. It's also cheap and desperate. They force new aspects of the Force into their stories left, right, and centre, presumably to cover up for the fact that they haven't got anything interesting to give their audience when it comes to character, plot, or themes. Why is it that we need to see all these new mechanics when there is already more than enough to work with in the first place? It's not inherently problematic to invent a new Force power, but there absolutely has to be justification for its existence, and the writers must reconcile the fact that no one in the galaxy has used them before. Why did Obi-Wan not just heal Qui-Gon's stab wound? Why couldn't Anakin have just healed Padme after childbirth? Why didn't Luke just heal Vader? If the argument is that none of those characters were as powerful as Grogu or Rey, then first of all, why? And second of all, fine, then make me believe it. Storytelling is all about setup and payoff. It's about sending characters on a journey of growth in one way or another. You can't just throw a new thing at an established universe that is nearly 50 years old and expect everything in it to just slot perfectly into place before you throw the next new thing right after it. There is a long established precedent in Star Wars for certain things working in a certain way, and if new stories are going to fit into that saga, they have to adhere to the precedent, while also being respectful and considerate anytime they want to set a new one. Since they bought the IP back in 2012, Disney have stewarded the franchise with nothing but greed and self-interest. They have never had any respect for what came before them, and they're still not done shitting out lazy, poorly written slop that not only contradicts the stories that George Lucas told, but also wears them like a skin suit. Whether Starfighter is worthwhile is yet to be seen, but if past behaviour is the best predictor of future behaviour, then I suppose things aren't looking very good for Star Wars in 2027. At least we'll get to see A New Hope again, back on the big screen where it once took the world by storm. Besides that, I suppose we can only pray that Ryan Gosling and his smarmy, witty charm has enough cheeky juice still in him to drag this hopeless, sticky shit up to the level that makes it worth watching. Happy 50th, Star Wars.